to talk about some NFL news. Lamar Jackson arrived for the first day of the Ravens offseason training program, sporting the I Love Jesus hoodie, smiling and whatnot. He also participated in these workouts with Derrick Henry also present. You see him sprinting, getting that off-season work in with the Catapult sports bra for whatever reason. I don't know why that's shaped that way. But the big news of the day wasn't this. It was the fact that Dan Orlovsky went on television and had this to say. I'll let you guys take a listen. Wow, that's really loud.
What should be Lamar's prime? And I'm not going to overreact to him not being there. Maybe he gets there in the next day or two, but it certainly sounds like that's not going to be the case.
He ended up showing up about 20 minutes after he said this.
ESPN put one of their analysts on live national television to question whether Lamar Jackson, a two-time MVP, was going to show up for voluntary workouts. 20 minutes later, Lamar Jackson walked through the door. On the same day, 20 minutes after the take aired. Let that land for a second. Because this is not just about a bad hot take that aged poorly before the segment even finished. This is about something much bigger. A pattern of disrespect toward one of the most dominant players in the NFL that keeps getting exposed over and over again, and a quarterback who does not need to say a single word in response because his actions keep doing all the talking for him. But before we get into the full breakdown of what happened, we need to expose exactly what ESPN did behind the scenes that made this situation even worse than it looked on camera. Because what went wrong here was not just one analyst making a mistake. The entire production chain failed. And the fact that it keeps failing in the same direction, against the same player, is not a coincidence. Plus, we are going to get into why Lamar showing up to these voluntary workouts is actually one of the most important culture moments in Ravens history this offseason. And we will get to the hidden story about the 29-year-old offensive coordinator whose entire future just changed because of what Lamar did that morning. Stay locked in, because there are multiple layers to this story and every single one of them matters. Here is exactly what happened. Dan Orlovsky went on ESPN and went on the air saying that Lamar Jackson had not shown up to the first day of the Ravens offseason program. He framed it as a concern. He suggested this might be something worth paying attention to. He put it out there into the national conversation that the Ravens franchise quarterback, the reigning MVP, was potentially absent from voluntary workouts during a critical offseason for this organization. 20 minutes later, Lamar Jackson arrived at the facility, smiling, in his hoodie, ready to work. The segment was still fresh. The take had barely finished circulating. And Lamar Jackson had already rendered the entire thing irrelevant without responding to a single word of it. And it gets worse for ESPN. This was not a situation where a reporter made an honest mistake with genuinely ambiguous information. The information was bad from the start. Nobody had confirmed that practice had even officially begun when the segment aired. Nobody had verified that the window for Lamar's arrival had actually closed. The research was incomplete, the producers ran with it anyway, the graphics team put it on screen, and Orlovsky, who trusted the information he was given, ended up being the face of a failure that was built by the entire production chain around him. That is the part that deserves to be called out directly. Dan Orlovsky catches heat constantly. He has become the analyst that every football fan on the internet piles on whenever something goes wrong. And some of that criticism is fair. When you give this many takes across this many platforms, some of them are going to miss. But this specific situation was not a Dan Orlovsky problem. This was an ESPN infrastructure problem. The researchers set him up. The producers ran the topic anyway. And Orlovsky trusted the system around him and got burned for it on the biggest sports network in the world. That is a pattern worth paying attention to. We will come back to it. But first, let's talk about what Lamar Jackson actually did that morning. Because the real story here is not about what ESPN got wrong. The real story is about what Lamar got spectacularly right. Now here is where it gets really interesting.
Everybody in the building know I'm willing to work just as hard as you, 53rd person on the depth chart, 90th person on the depth chart. Even though I am the first person on the depth chart, I will grind like the 90th person on the depth chart. Jesse Minner, you've never been a coach before? I got your back. You've never run a program before? I, Lamar Jackson, have your back. I am going to make sure you know I am all in. Whatever you need, I'm here for it. Lamar ain't got to be there. He ain't got to be there because it's not punishable. He ain't got to be there because he's making enough money. And he ain't got to be there because it's not mandatory. So Lamar Jackson being there is a huge step in the right direction. And it's not even for Lamar. Lamar being there is huge for Minner. Lamar being there is huge for the OC. Lamar being there is huge for wide receiver number 3 and wide receiver number 4. Lamar being there is huge for running back number 3 or linebacker number 3 who's like, dang, if Lamar here, I gotta be here. To me, this is...
Lamar Jackson did not have to be at those workouts. Not legally, not contractually, not by any obligation this league places on its players. These are voluntary sessions. The word voluntary is right there in the name. Superstars skip them constantly. It is practically an accepted part of how elite NFL players manage their off-season bodies and their long-term health. Nobody raises an eyebrow when a franchise quarterback sits out voluntary OTAs to do private work with his own trainers. It is normal. It is accepted. It is smart from a pure physical maintenance standpoint. And yet Lamar Jackson was there. First day. On time. Ready to go. Working alongside Derrick Henry with the kind of energy that sets a tone for an entire building before a single play has been installed. Ask yourself what that actually communicates to everyone inside that Ravens facility. Because it is not just a feel-good story about a star player being a good teammate. It is a direct message to every single person in that organization, from the starting left tackle all the way down to the last man on the practice squad, that the standard in Baltimore is going to be set from the very top. That the most important player on this team, the man who has already proven he is one of the best to ever do it, is not treating this offseason like a vacation. He is treating it like an opportunity. That message is priceless. No coaching staff memo, no team meeting speech, no motivational video can replicate what Lamar Jackson walking through that door on the first day of voluntary workouts actually does to a locker room culture. Because it is not words. It is action. And in professional football, where players have seen every speech and heard every motivational line 100 times, action is the only currency that actually moves people. Think about it from the perspective of linebacker number 3 on this roster. A young player who is fighting for a spot, trying to make an impression, trying to show this new coaching staff that he belongs. He walks into that facility on day 1 of voluntary workouts and sees Lamar Jackson already there. Already working. Already invested. What does that player do? He locks in. He does not half-step his way through that workout. He does not check his phone. He does not mentally check out because these sessions are technically voluntary. He matches the energy of the most important person in the building, because that is how locker room culture actually works. And here is the layer that nobody is talking about enough. This is Jesse Minchin's very first offseason as a head coach in the NFL. Let that sit with you. Brand new head coach. Never run an NFL program before. Coming in to manage one of the most talented rosters in the AFC, with a 2-time MVP quarterback as his centerpiece, and enormous pressure from a fan base that is hungry for a Super Bowl after years of playoff disappointment. The last thing Jesse Minchin needed on day 1 of his first offseason as a head coach was to be managing questions about whether his franchise player was bought into his program. Lamar Jackson eliminated that problem before it could even begin. He did not just show up for himself. He showed up for Minchin. He gave a rookie head coach the most powerful endorsement available in a professional locker room, public buy-in from the best player on the team. Before a single game plan had been installed. Before the new offensive system had been introduced. Before anyone outside the building had any real read on what this Minchin-led Ravens team was going to look like. Lamar Jackson said, with his presence and his work ethic and his energy, I am all in on this. Whatever Jesse Minchin is building, I am building it with him. That is franchise-altering leadership. And ESPN was busy questioning whether he was going to show up. Now let us talk about the other man whose entire professional trajectory just got altered by what Lamar did that morning. Ravens offensive coordinator Declan Doyle. 29 years old. The youngest offensive coordinator in the NFL. A man who has never called plays at this level before, who is stepping into a system that needs to be installed from scratch, and who is responsible for coordinating an offense that includes 2 of the most uniquely talented players in the history of their respective positions. Derrick Henry on the ground. Lamar Jackson in the air. If you are Declan Doyle at 29 years old and you walk into your first official team session as an NFL offensive coordinator and both of those men are standing in front of you ready to work, you feel a completely different level of confidence about what you are building than you would feel if either of them had stayed home. Because here is the truth about installing a new offense with a veteran franchise quarterback. The learning curve for everyone else on the roster is directly tied to how much the quarterback engages. When the best player on offense is present, asking questions, working through concepts, communicating with receivers and running backs about timing and spacing, everyone around him learns faster. The installation accelerates. The communication channels open up sooner. And the offense hits the regular season with a foundation that took 3 months of voluntary work to build rather than trying to cram it all into mandatory camp. Lamar Jackson being at those voluntary workouts is not a soft story about good character. It is a competitive advantage for the Baltimore Ravens. It is weeks of offensive installation compressed into the earliest possible timeline. And it is a 29-year-old offensive coordinator who now goes home from day one of his NFL head coaching era feeling like the most fortunate play caller alive. Now let us circle back to the Dan Orlovsky situation, because the deeper issue here goes beyond one bad segment on one morning. The problem with ESPN's coverage of Lamar Jackson is not any single analyst. It is a systemic one. Lamar has been questioned, doubted, and framed as a concern at every turn, despite 2 MVP awards, despite elite regular season production year after year, despite leading one of the most consistently dangerous offenses in the AFC. The media narrative around him has always carried an undertone of skepticism that simply does not get applied to other quarterbacks at his level with the same consistency. And every single time that skepticism gets aired publicly, Lamar Jackson responds the same way. Not with a press conference. Not with a social media post. Not with a quote to a reporter. He responds by showing up and doing the work. Quietly. Consistently. Relentlessly. The hoodie. The smile. The sprints. The film sessions. The voluntary workouts that he did not have to attend. All of it adding up to a body of evidence that makes every doubting take look smaller and smaller by comparison. If you are a Ravens fan watching this, and if you were worried for even a second when you saw that ESPN segment, understand this clearly. Lamar Jackson is not a question mark heading into 2025. He is not a player whose commitment needs to be verified by the off-season attendance record. He is a 2-time MVP in the prime of his career, on a roster that is being actively upgraded around him, with a new offensive system being built specifically to put him in positions to finally get over the playoff hump that has been the one remaining knock on his legacy. The doubters are going to keep doubting. That is what they do. And Lamar Jackson is going to keep showing up and making them look exactly the way ESPN looked on that Tuesday morning, caught off guard, caught wrong, and caught on camera. Here is the bottom line. ESPN aired a segment questioning Lamar Jackson's commitment to his team's off-season program. 20 minutes later, Lamar Jackson walked into the building. The network got embarrassed live on air, the analyst took the heat for a research failure that was not entirely his fault, and Lamar Jackson spent the morning proving, for the 100th time, that the noise around him has never once changed who he is or how he works. My prediction: the 2025 Baltimore Ravens are going to be the most dangerous team in the AFC. New defensive coordinator, upgraded pass rush, a fully committed franchise quarterback, and a culture that was defined on day one of the offseason by Lamar Jackson walking through that door with a smile on his face and work on his mind. If you want to follow every development in Baltimore this season, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment below. Do you think the media will ever stop doubting Lamar Jackson, or is disrespecting him just going to be a permanent part of the sports media cycle at this point? This is Gridiron Insights. We'll see you in the next one.